Welcome to The Story Behind the Story. I'm Todd Duplantis, and we're podcasting to you from the HCC TV studios at Houston Community College. Our guest today is Terry O'Rourke, and Terence O'Rourke serves as a special assistant county attorney to the Harris County Attorney Vince Ryan. O'Rourke operated his own private law practice from 1997 until 2008. He taught at St. Thomas from 2002 to 2012. He served as senior assistant county attorney under Harris County DA Mike Driscoll. In 1973, he was named as assistant attorney general under Texas Attorney General John Hill. He's also held positions in the U.S. Department of Energy and was White House counsel under President Jimmy Carter. He earned his Juris Doctor at University of Texas, has a B.A. in economics and a master's in hydrology. He's nicknamed El Tigre. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you. You've got the story behind the story already. Thank you very much.
First question I want to ask you, El Tigre. Tell me about the nickname and where you got it.
I played for the St. Vincent Tigers. And so it was El Tigre. I was the quarterback of the team that won the city championship, so I became El Tigre.
And kept the nickname all along. It fits very well.
Yeah.
How does a hydrologist become an attorney, or is it vice versa?
Well, it's both. Is that when I went to college so long ago, I was interested in pollution and the environment, but it was even before environment was even a word. Back in the 1960s, environment was like a word. It meant like the ambience at a cocktail party. It's hard to believe now, but it was a universe far away, and I knew that the connection between the oil business and politics and the environment that I loved. So I studied hydrology. I got a master's degree from Rice in that.
And this translated into winning some large environmental cases. I know one thing I saw an interview with you, and you talked about wanting a corporate death penalty. And did you coin that term? Because
I did, yes.
That really grabs you right there. Tell me about that case and how you coined that.
It was a case against a waste company they put tetrahydrothiophenone into the atmosphere, and that was the chemical that's used in natural gas to make it stink, to make you get sick. And in this one pollution event, and they had several, this pollution event that got reported to us, they had people on the ship channel, big companies, snitching each other off, which polluters don't do because of this all-waste tank cleaning company. And I filed in court that this is just unacceptable. You know, it's one thing to be a polluter and have a little stuff, but to put out terribly toxic, harmful chemicals that threatens everyone, that you forfeited your right to be in existence as a corporation. So I wanted the corporate death penalty.
And you went up against these guys, more or less from what I read, on your own. You didn't have federal or state support, but you had local support, correct?
Harris County Attorney Mike Driscoll stood behind me, and you know, I was a lot younger then than I am now, but it just seemed like the right thing to do. And the result of it is we had tremendously powerful lawyers on the other side. We did settle the case, and the result of it is they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars cleaning up a toxic dump in the Highlands today that's now a county park. So if you ever go out to the Allison Pierce Park, once upon a time that was a toxic waste dump that was cleaned up by all waste tank cleaning as a result of that case.
You talked about corporate death penalty, and some people may go, oh, that's just crazy talk there. But case in point, you won a case against the Champion Paper Company, and then later on they morphed into International Paper, and you had to go up against them. So if you would have had the corporate death penalty, you wouldn't have had to deal with that, right?
Well, yeah, except that the waste that they put out, dioxin, lasts almost forever. Dioxin is toxic in parts per trillion. And when County Attorney Vince Ryan got elected back in 2008, he asked me to take a look at, like, Terry, what can we do as the county attorney that makes a difference? You know, not to go sue Jose for his taqueria grease or do some kind of things that puts you on TV because you're doing something that may be entertaining. What really do we need to do? And I looked around and talked to every environmental organization, and it was clear we had to get the dioxin out of Galveston Bay. And there are these huge pits on the San Jacinto River that were left from the waste of the Champion Paper Company.
And that's what I read, because and explain to people once again where this were. This was hidden, more or less hidden in the bay, under the water, in barrels, correct?
Well, actually, it was not barrels, but they were in pits. When they did it back in the 1960s, these pits were on the side of the river. But what we forget is that there was subsidence in Houston-Harris County, so the pits sank into the river, and nobody really wanted to know about it. Nobody wanted to go through the expense of properly removing this stuff.
Were they just hoping this was going to go away
Hoping
and
it would
people
go
were going
away,
to forget?
but what happened is that there were these fish samples that were done that had fish with dioxin in it, which is dangerous, especially to women who are pregnant, because it gets in their milk and it produces, when they're pregnant, it produces birth defects, but you get it in their mother's milk and it gets to these kids and it does really bad stuff in the development of their brains. So we had to get it out, and the question was, where was it coming from? And it was coming from these pits that were largely underwater. And we sued what was then the Champion Paper Company, International Paper, the largest paper company in the world, as well as Waste Management, Inc., that had put it there.
And of course, that name is still prevalent today.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
Subject to controversy at times.
Well, it is, but I mean, they have fought us in the legislature, but they did pay the largest civil penalty in the history of Texas water pollution in that case, and they're going to pay for a $100 million removal of it, 100% to get that stuff out, which, well, maybe take us to our next topic, is it's so threatening because of hurricanes.
Absolutely, and I want to talk more in a little while about which is because it's fascinating to me. I've heard about this on the news, but you're working on a plan to protect Galveston Bay and ultimately protect us from hurricanes. We're going to get to that in a while, but we're going to go to a short break in a moment. When we come back, I want to talk about your history and a connection to a certain president, and also a speech you heard as well. I want to talk about that when we return. Terry O'Rourke joining us on The Story Behind the Story. I'm Todd Duplantis. We'll be back right after this.
We have academic programs that help students get from high school into a university. And the data is very clear that students that take the path of a community college finish in far higher numbers than students that start straight into a university experience. Our students can achieve a baccalaureate degree in multiple fields from the universities in the area without ever leaving Houston Community College.
HCC. So many classes, so little tuition. Register today at hccs.edu/now.
Welcome back to The Story Behind the Story from HCC TV Studios. I'm Todd Duplantis, and joining me today is Terence O'Rourke. Terry O'Rourke, El Tigre, thanks for being here on the show.
Well, thank you. It's really a joy.
We were talking about some of the environmental cases that you were involved in just a few moments ago. I want to talk now about some of your history, your personal history, and getting your start working with Lyndon Johnson. Maybe you can tell me about your connection to him and his family.
Well, I was a page boy. I could say maybe the story really begins at Rice University when I was a kid in high school and heard John F. Kennedy speak there, the famous stadium speech, when he said, you know, why do we go to the moon? Not because it is easy, because it is hard, and then he asked, why does Rice play Texas? Well, heck, I ended up going to Rice partially as a result of that speech, but it really did impress me. I wanted to be a part of who John F. Kennedy was. It was that call. It's hard to believe now when he said, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. That just spoke to me as a kid. I wanted to be in service of my country.
So that worked perfectly with you.
It did for me, and as a result of it, I started writing letters to my congressman and said, Congressman, I'd like to be a page boy. Well, Congressman Bob Casey, whose name's on the Federal Building here in town, appointed me as a page, and it's like my life changed. By the summer of 1963, I was standing on the lawn of the White House shaking hands with John F. Kennedy. And it was one of those magic moments in time. But, one of the things that you talk about in a funny way is you forget what a different place it was.
Right.
Like when I went to Rice University as a high school student, I just rode my bike. There was no security. I took a picture of the president. He was not much further away than you and me with my Brownie Hawkeye camera of John F. Kennedy.
How times have changed.
Riding in the same car.
Because of what happened to him.
Well, the same car
Right.
he was killed in,
Sure.
he was riding that day, that blue Lincoln Continental. And anyway, it was a long time ago, but it was so long ago that when I was a page boy and I was from Texas, I dated this girl from Texas up there whose father was vice president named Lucy Baines Johnson. And boy, I'll tell you, the life changed when on November 22nd, 1963. So I got to see a lot of it, and including, well, the harshness of that, but also the beginning of the civil rights movement, which I felt so proud to be a part of, knowing Lyndon and the story of the courage that he had that changed our entire society.
Did you think about going into politics for some time?
Oh, yeah. When I was a kid, when I was there, I was in front of it. It was like, you talk about drug addiction or alcoholism or something. Politics is its own form of it. I wanted to be, they called it tidal basin fever, and you got it. I wanted to be a United States Senator. I was a page boy later in the United States Senate. That's what I wanted to be. It was like, who could not want to do that? So yeah, I did. I wanted to be in politics.
You had a chance, so you moved on to get a chance to work in the White House.
Yes.
As serving on the council for President Jimmy Carter. Tell me how that came about and what that was like.
Well, I cared about energy and the environment. In 1976, I chose to be a candidate for the Democratic nomination for an obscure agency called the Texas Railroad Commission, which has really nothing to do with railroads, but everything to do with oil and gas. I'd read this book about energy for survival, of using alternative energy. Well, I was way ahead of my time, but there was one other guy who was a Democrat running at that time who'd read the same book I did called Energy for Survival, and that was James Earl Carter, the governor of Georgia. So when I lost for the Democratic nomination and he was elected president of the United States, I got invited to serve for President Carter and be a part of his team to do the Carter Energy Plan, which had all these kinds of things about alternative energy that is a part of our society today.
What was it like working with Jimmy Carter? I mean, you've got to, does it shock you how active he is even to this day? He is maybe not today, but up to the last decade, the man has been one of the most active ex-presidents or former presidents.
He is, and I pray and believe that Jimmy Carter will be treated much better in history than he was by the electorate. I was with him when he made really courageous decisions, like the deregulation of oil and gas, which he did, which got him no votes in the Democratic primaries and really didn't help him get reelected president, but was the right thing to do. We had price controls, alternative energy that he believed in, that he did all kinds of things, and of course, on human rights, Jimmy Carter, I believe, will become our finest president.
Well, he certainly has left much of a certain incredible legacy after he left office.
Yes, it was. But what it was like, it was tough. I mean, it was a very tough time with inflation like it was that had come actually out of the Vietnam War, where we ran a war without paying taxes and put a whole bunch of inflation. So we had both inflation and runaway oil and gas prices because of the Arab oil embargo. It was tough.
I want to get on to moving with your time in the district attorney's office, but before I get to that, I was at the theaters a couple of weeks ago, and I'm watching some previews for a documentary of Molly Ivins, and I see your face pop up. You obviously knew her, spent some time with her. Maybe you can talk about your thoughts towards her. Tell us a little bit about her, so that folks
you
may
have
know.
to see the movie Raise Hell with Molly Ivins. Whether you see it in the theaters here now or see it on Netflix or whatever, it is a wonderfully done story. My story with Molly Ivins began, I was an intern reporter at the Houston Chronicle back in the old days, for you people in the news business, where we had copy paper and carbon paper and mechanical typewriters, and we typed with 2 fingers. And
I do remember those days.
And there was cigarette smoke and cursing and all kinds of things in the newsroom. I sat next to this stunningly beautiful woman who was extraordinarily smart, who was a graduate student at Columbia School of Journalism when I was a sophomore at Rice. She sat right next to me, and it was Molly Ivins. And boy, she was just an amazing person. She was smart, funny, and what people don't get is she had gone to Smith College up in the East Coast, Ivy, the equivalent of the female Ivy League, and she had gone to school in France. So she spoke like Jacqueline Kennedy. She had this East Coast upper income French inflected voice. And so later, as you get to know her as the kind of character, the kind of cartoon character that she became, to realize that she made herself into that person, just like perhaps Samuel Clemens turning himself into Mark Twain.
She created the persona.
She did.
That
She
became the
created-
legend.
Yeah.
And of
she
course, a
did.
book she put out several years later by George W. Bush helped her a lot too. And that
Yeah.
was shortly before her death, though, correct?
Yes, that's right. Yes, that she. Of course, we all knew each other. I mean, George Bush, I knew because he dated a girl that went to Rice named Kathy Wolfman, to whom he was engaged. And so I would see George around at parties. He was the son of a congressman, but I'd work in Congress as a page boy, so I got along with him, and we would drink and be funny and all that. But the idea that he'd be the president of the United States was way beyond our thought pattern. Then.
Didn't cross your mind?
Didn't cross my mind. No.
I want to flash forward to the 80s. You had a chance to work in the district attorney's office with District Attorney Mike Driscoll. It was the mid-80s. Things were a lot different back in Houston. What was the culture back then in the DA's office or in the courtrooms?
County attorney. I was in the county attorney's office, and I worked in the DA's office on a corruption case involving a county commissioner. It was tough. I would say the harshest thing that if we look backwards is that Houston, Harris County was the death penalty capital of not just Texas, but the United States and the world. It was a very harsh system, and especially for people on the bottom of the pile, black people and Hispanic people, it was not good. And I was not a part of that. I was on the civil side with Mike Driscoll on pollution, which I was proud of, but it was a different time. And the 80s, we had the up and down of oil and gas, and so it was a rock and roll time. It was a lot different than it is now. Yet in many ways, the kind of optimism, the other side of it, there was a quality that we still have about we're Houston and we're going to be better than where we are now. And I have that kind of Houston proud.
Well, we had to reinvent ourselves back in the 80s when oil crashed and people lost their jobs. We didn't know where we were going to go, and the city seems to have reinvented itself incredibly over the last 20 to 30 years.
Well, the embrace of just what HCC is an example that the embrace of the diversity that we are. Instead of, I grew up in a world of segregation and the opposite, to be the most diverse city in the United States and to embrace it as an asset came in that period. The shock of realizing how dependent we were on the price of oil, that people who had been rich and smart one day were suddenly declaring bankruptcy, and some of them were indicted on stock fraud and other things because of their deals went south. Boy, there was a whole lot of bad paper out there. Suddenly there was a shock that we had to be more than that. And then the embrace of the technology that now is, of course, the largest medical center in the world, the technology side of that equation that is also a part of HCC. In other words, that you had to have a system that supported a diverse modern economy came out of that period. It was a time of introspection.
I want to talk about the future. We've talked about the past, and we're going to talk about some things in Galveston Bay that you'd like to see in the near future. We're going to take a short break. We'll be back with more on the story behind the story. He's Terence O'Rourke. I'm Todd Duplantis. We'll be back after this.
I've seen people's lives change just by attending a class at HCC.
Some of them might not have the financial means to go to a four-year university. That doesn't make them any less quote-unquote smart than the kids who go to a four-year school.
HCC is easy to get to. It's easy to apply and easy to become a part of.
It gave me so much confidence.
Once you finish your 2 years there, you can transition into a four-year university or go into the workforce.
It's affordable, it's accessible, it changes lives.
Did you know that Houston Community College has the largest enrollment of online community college students in the United States? Hi, I'm Paul Calhoun. The HCC Online College proudly enrolls over 20,000 students. We offer more than 30 online degree and certificate programs, as well as online student services, including admissions, advising, counseling, and technical support. HCC Online College, anywhere, anytime. For more information, visit our website, hccs.edu/online.
HCC. So many reasons, so little tuition. Register today at hccs.edu/now.
Welcome back to the story behind the story. I'm Todd Duplantis from the HCC TV studios at Houston Community College, joined today by Terry O'Rourke. Thanks for being here with us. We talked about your past, your career. I want to talk about things you have on the horizon in the future. You're an environmentalist, and you've won a number of cases, but right now you're looking at protecting the Gulf Coast, particularly Galveston Bay, against upcoming storms and hurricanes. Tell me about the protection of Galveston Bay and the coastal barrier.
Well, it is a real problem that everybody who listens to this ought to understand, is that there is a hurricane that is going to come. It's not a question of if, it is only when. And it's going to hit the largest petrochemical complex in the United States, and we're going to have toxic waste destruction greater than any in the history of our species. It's that bad. What the engineers at Rice have looked at is a 25-foot storm surge that will hit Galveston Bay. Just like the 1900 storm hit and destroyed Galveston, it will destroy the core of Houston, and it'll put dimethyl double death, toxic waste, all kinds of things that you don't even think about in the soil all over here, and it will kill thousands of people. And that's going to happen if we don't do something. And the sad news is we're not yet doing it. So this plan is one to put a barrier in Galveston Bay that will protect against the storm surge that's going to come.
Now, from what I've seen in some news reports, is this something like a gate? And isn't it a series involving levees and a gate as well?
It is. It's essentially a parallel levee to the Houston Ship Channel. It would widen the Houston Ship Channel and take the dirt that you do for widening it to make it a two-lane road for ships, but take that dirt and make a 25-foot tall dike that would protect us from the storm surge. This is completely different than what's called the Ike Dike or the coastal spine, because Galveston Bay is so large, the modeling shows that it will be a hurricane like the so-called 1928 Okeechobee hurricane that killed over 2,000 people.
I guess the first question a lot of folks would ask, say that's a great idea. Where do we get the funding for it?
Well, you get the funding for it out of tax money. It's going to have to be paid, and that'll be federal, state, and local. And you say, well, where do we get the money? Well, we're building a bridge that costs $1 billion over the Houston Ship Channel right now. We build sports stadia that cost that much. So it's not that big a deal. We're talking about a $5 billion expenditure out of funds here, but that would be less than the local share on the Ike Dike. So it's a lot of money, but it ain't that much money, and there are lots of ways to do it. Part of it is that the companies on the Houston Ship Channel have to pay for some of it. There's a whole lot of money that comes through the United States government through Homeland Security that can be used for it.
So it sounds like a great plan. You know, a lot of folks say, okay, we can find the money for it. How long are we looking before this could become a reality?
Well, the good news about this is it can be built in less than 10 years for less than $10 billion, which makes it a lot different than the alternatives that the Corps of Engineers has been looking at before. It's complementary to the Corps of Engineers plan, but this is a plan that really came out of Rice University and the Severe Storm Surge Study Group, and has had architects from New York and other places look at it. But what it would do also is it would put a park in Galveston Bay that would have thousands of acres of places for people to go for recreation, which would be a tremendous benefit.
We're talking to Terry O'Rourke. He is counsel to the Harris County Attorney. You filed a case, which I find quite interesting, because the president has been talking about getting everybody's count and re-wanting to print the census that's going to go out. But you filed a case that actually has addressed this a while ago. Maybe you can tell us about
Well,
this.
yeah, we won, and we were against the President of the United States, because the question that he wanted to ask was, are you a citizen of the United States? And do you have people in your home who are not citizens? Well, what happens when you ask a question like that is people don't answer. They are afraid of providing false information to the government, which is a crime, but it's not a crime to not answer it. So what you do is you just don't answer. And what that would have produced is an undercount. And in a city like Houston, Harris County, with over 500,000 people who are not residents, that ends up being thousands, actually millions of dollars of funding that we would lose out on, as well as representation, and not just in the Congress of the United States, but in the state legislature and other things like that, and school boards. Just imagine what the population, how important it is to a TV station about what is your market.
Absolutely.
Or here in Galveston, how many people are on Galveston Island when there's a hurricane?
Well,
If
it's
you have an
important to our
undercount-
students as
Yeah.
well.
Oh,
We need to, for federal funding, we need to know the exact number of our students.
Well, and the population that you
Absolutely.
serve. Yes, it's essential. Well, the view there from our view was that it's a very narrow view to try to force a question like that. There are lots of ways to find out how many non-citizens or citizens there are other than asking on the census. The census comes out of the U.S. Constitution. It's a fundamental in our democracy for the United States House of Representatives, because it's based on the number of people, not the number of citizens. And all the way back when we counted slaves, it was a big issue back that actually made the country possible in the great compromise that was America.
Terence O'Rourke, Terry O'Rourke, thanks for joining us. L.T. Gray from the Harris County Attorney's Office. Fascinating career. We appreciate you being here with us on The Story Behind the Story. And thank you for joining us today. I'm Todd Duplantis. I'll see you next time.